Hey everyone, this is Adam from carnewscafe.com. If you'd like to tweet us, we're at carnewscafe. My personal Twitter is at Adam Yamada, Yamada. And today I have my CNC colleague Aaron Turpin here. What's
Hello,
going on,
everybody.
Aaron?
This is Aaron from, of course, carnewscafe.com. Uh, things are going pretty well. This is like the first week all year I haven't had a test vehicle. So we thought, since we don't have like a new vehicle to talk about, let's talk about the first car we ever had. How cool was that?
Okay, so what was it like when you had to ride around on a horse to get anywhere?
Yeah, my,
Oh
my,
man.
my horse's name was Jim. Uh,
Oh man, come on. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking around.
oh, hell.
So your first car, Aaron, was a Toyota Corolla, right?
Yes, it was it wasn't just any Toyota Corolla. If I can get it to work here, I will show you a photo of it. Look at that. Um, it was it was a Toyota Corolla LE model. It was a 1984 Toyota Corolla LE. This was back when in the golden age of Toyota, and the car, by the way, was literally gold colored. You can see. This was the golden age of Toyota when they were making those little four-cylinder engine, carbureted engines that you could not kill. This had a five-speed manual transmission, and you could grind it all you wanted, and it would never die. Um, and I beat this car. I bought it. When I bought this car, it had 155,000 miles on it, and I was really stoked because it had air conditioning, cruise control, and um, um, it was the most high-end car I'd literally ever been in at that point. And I bought it for $650,
And
and
when was this?
this was in 1989, I believe, 89 or 90, one of those 2 years.
Well, so that still wasn't that much money for a car, even back then.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
was a good
it
deal,
is a
but
fair amount, right?
the
But
guy was when I bought it, it was my dad's car, and he was going to trade it in, and it was the trade-in value of the car was higher than what he charged me for it, but not horribly so. I mean, it wasn't, he wasn't going to get much out of it because it was such
yeah.
a high mileage car. You know, consider at that point it was about 6 years old and it had 155,000 miles on it. That's a lot of mileage. So, the trading value just wasn't there. So I bought it, and I remember being really unhappy that my insurance cost $100 a month, which at the time was about a quarter of my total income. So yeah,
hundred
and
dollars a month.
that was
That was
steep.
yeah, back then.
That was because I was young and because I was on my parents' policy. My dad required that I have full coverage for the car. I couldn't just have liability. Um, and yeah, and I never understood that because I never once used that full coverage. Windshield replacement was like $40. Uh, I remember buying tires for the
So
car, and I would get all four tires mounted and everything, brand new tires mounted and everything for $100.
so how
Um,
long did you have the Corolla?
it had 289,000 miles on it when it finally gave up. Um,
Wow. So
and I had it for, I think I was 23.
hmm,
I had other cars in the interim, but I always had this car. This was my reliable, get there, always works car. It
right.
was, it was easy to work on, easy to fix, easy to maintain, cheap on gas, all that stuff. And then in the meantime, I owned like a 1973 International Travelall, and I owned, I owned a handful of vehicles that were very high maintenance because of their age or just what they were. But this was always the reliable go-to car, and I used to drive it everywhere. I literally climbed mountains with this car to go fishing and stuff. And I would carry. I think I've told you this before. I've talked about this before. I used to carry a spare oil pan
Battery.
because it cost $18, I think it was, or something, and a gasket. And I had a toolbox in the trunk, and then I had a case of oil and a couple of other things. And I would hit rocks and ruin the oil pan, and I would just take it off, put a new one on, right there, wherever I was, in the middle of the wilderness.
Hmm.
So yeah, because that was the lowest point on the car, so it would always hit something, because I was always driving at places it really wasn't made to go. Well,
Were
I'd be
you,
following. I remember following my friend. He had a big Chevy pickup truck, and I was following along behind him. And we're driving up a ravine, a dry ravine.
so so just out of curiosity, when you had to get rid of the car, were you sad? Was it like, oh, this is my Corolla? We had
I was
good times.
actually I was pretty bummed because the car at that by the time it finally blew up, it went up in a blaze of glory. When it finally happened, I had taken this car. We'd gone to concerts. We had played. We had driven around in it as a band. We had all kinds of stuff. It had little pinholes in the roof where my friend's spikes on his leather jacket had hit the roof because we were bouncing around jamming to music. Um, all kinds of stuff that had a. I had a third light that my dad had installed, the third tail light, because it saved like $10 a year or something on the insurance. And above that, I had a sticker that said "Choose Death." It was a white sticker with black letters, just said "Choose Death," making fun of. Most people would assume that I was making fun of the pro-lifers or whatever, but what I was really doing was, I mean, we were a death metal band, so that was like "Choose Death," and we had, it had Metallica stickers on it. It had all kinds of stuff, and I would, it had battle scars where cigarettes and stuff that didn't necessarily have tobacco had fallen and burnt the seat or the floorboard, the carpet on the floor or whatever, and just all kinds of stuff. All these battle
Yeah,
scars that
right,
just
right. After all that
made the car
mileage.
what it was. And when it finally died, what happened was I I had loaned it to my uncle, and he was driving it. He was a truck driver, and he was driving it down the freeway to go visit his parents, and which was my stepmom's parents. And he was driving down the freeway in it about 70 miles an hour. And I had told him, take it easy because the ball joints are going bad on the front, and I need to change them out, but I haven't gotten around to it.
Right.
And he's driving down the freeway, and it was a little bit rainy and stuff, and something happened, so the car kind of wavered a little, and one of the joints gave. And when it jerked from that, with the joint going, with that wheel literally popping off, it's basically what happens when a ball joint gives. When the wheel folded, that jerk caused the other one to come off, to
Oh, and
break.
did the
So
whole
the whole
axle
front
come?
end of the car just smacked to the ground,
Yeah, yeah.
and it just drug along at 70 miles an hour on the freeway, and so that wiped off the oil pan and by the time it was done, a good chunk of everything underneath the car, the exhaust and all of that, and it just laid this long trail of fire from the oil and the everything that was dumping on the ground, with all the sparks, and so that just killed the car. It was totaled, and I had spun out on an icy road and went into a ditch, and when the tow operator came and pulled it out of the ditch, he bent the frame in the process, and they had reset the frame and not totaled the car. And
So,
so, I
uh,
mean, this car had a lot of history and
yeah.
damage, and that was just kind of the final, dead car. But he didn't wreck, he didn't get hurt, and nothing happened to him. Just the car slid down the road and
Yeah, and you
basically
were more
wiped the
upset
whole
about
front end
that.
off. I was really upset about it. At that time, this was the only car I had.
You had
So I was
sold all your other cars.
yeah, the Travelall I had sold because I just couldn't afford to keep dumping money into it, and the other cars I had were parts cars, not actual cars. They were cars that I had bought because I had friends that needed parts, so I could make money selling them parts off of the cars. So I had bought the cars, for like $50 or whatever, and they were just sitting there. Um, in a back lot of the apartments I was living in, and so I ended up selling those to the junkyard that I used to work for at that point, in order to raise enough capital to get another car.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was, but this was, for me, this was my first car. It was, it was, for most, it's not the coolest car in the world. It was kind of lame looking. It
Yeah, but
wasn't
it
cool.
got you there. You had
Well,
fun
yeah,
in
and
it.
and at the time, my income was $300 to $400 a month. And I was going to school. I was doing, all that stuff. So the car was perfect because I was so cheap. Because it didn't cost anything. Maintenance and everything was cheap. Um,
Well,
you
even
know,
today on a Corolla, it's cheap, right?
yeah, relatively,
Yeah.
compared to other
And
vehicles.
Corollas are the best-selling cars in the world because they're so reliable. I mean, one's
Well, yeah,
you-
and the '80s, that was really the golden age of Toyota.
yeah.
They had that
I
A
think I
platform with everything that
still
was just
see
perfect.
like 80s Corollas going around.
Yeah, you do, and in fact, I have a neighbor that has one parked in the driveway, and that's what it's a 1986, and that's what she puts behind her, on the trailer behind her motorhome when she goes traveling. She leaves her minivan at home and takes that. So now, Adam, what was your first car? What was the first car you ever had?
Actually, the first car I've ever owned, I still drive it. It's a '96 Honda Accord.
Okay.
My aunt bought it brand new, and she drove it for I don't know how many years, about 12 or 13 years, something like that. And my grandma at the time um, had a Honda Civic, but my aunt was going to give my grandma the Accord because it was slightly bigger than her Civic, which was a two-door coupe. So she sold that, and my aunt gave it to my grandma, and she drove that for a couple of years. I think about 4 or 5. So it's a car that's always been in the family. I know the history.
Okay.
It's not the coolest car in the world, but I've never had any serious issues with the thing, and I've learned to do quite a lot of jobs on it because it's needed things here and there. But Hondas and Toyotas are actually great cars to have if you want to learn to work on a car, because there's a lot of jobs on even the Camry that my parents have that I've done, and they're just super easy. But
Yeah, and the maintenance is really straightforward.
yeah,
That's one of the biggest selling
that's
points. Toyota, Honda, Mazda, and the Japanese brands, specifically. That's a
yeah.
big bonus to
So
those.
originally, she was actually going to sell this Accord, and when I heard about that, I said, "Whoa, whoa, wait! You're gonna sell it?" I said, "No, no." I was like, "I'll buy the Accord from you guys, because it's spent its whole life in California. I'm sort of from the northeast of the U.S. I'm used to harsh winters, so any Accords you're
Mhm.
gonna get are probably kind of from that era. They started to rust out. So I actually gave her, I think, about $600 because I didn't have that much money at the time. Then later I sent her another check for $600, which is pretty cheap actually for a
Mhm.
'96 Accord. Accords hold their value uh, even ones from that age.
Yep, it's funny because people don't realize this, but Honda, especially, but Toyota, to a large extent, um, these are companies that the reason that the sticker price up front seems to be so large is because the resale value down the road is also going to be large.
Yeah.
Um, the upfront price you're paying. A lot of
Well,
people say, "Well, you're just paying for that nameplate on the front." Well, that's true because that's the resale value down the street.
yeah. Well, I'm never gonna sell this car. I told them when I bought it, I said if I can get 300,000 or half a million miles out of it, I will.
Oh yeah.
And I said if the engine goes, if the transmission goes, I'll probably put the money into getting them rebuilt or put in a new one, not a new one, a used one myself. But it's been a great car. So what I did was I gave my grandma $600 for it. I flew out to California where the car was in Orange County, and I stayed with them for a little while, and then I drove it back here to
Okay.
Maryland. And it was a great experience driving across the country. I went to the Rocky Mountain National Park in that thing. I drove around there for like a day and a half. And I had no problems driving across the country. It had some oil leaking issues, but when I got back here, I had the tools to do a head gasket replacement, and I replaced the
Okay.
distributor seal. I've also done a few other things. I think the tie rod ends, jobs like that.
Stuff that
But the
happens just
car,
because of the age of the vehicle
yeah, yeah, the car has
and how it's been driven.
129,000 miles on it, and I love that car. I have to say, some people are like, oh, you should trade it in and get like a Miata or something, and I was like, why? It gets me from point A to point B, and I don't have any plans to soup it up or anything or
Yeah.
tune it because it's just a great car to get you there. And I've thought about putting in a better stereo system or in a head
Well,
unit, but
yeah, with
this
that
down the road.
Corolla, that was the first thing I did. I bought the car for $650, and then I put $1,200 of stereo in it. Um,
That's
but
actually the one. That's the one. When people say, "Well, what could I do to my car to increase the value?" I always say, "Put in a better stereo system." I said that's probably the only thing that the wider population would be interested in.
and
If
most
you,
people, a lot of people don't understand, but if you buy a pre-2005 or so car,
yeah.
they were literally made in their lower trim levels. They were literally designed so that you could take them over to a stereo shop and get a better stereo.
Hmm.
Um, not so much nowadays. Now they tend to come with 6 and 8 speakers and all that stuff built in, even in the lower trims. But back then, cars were made to go down and say, to hell with this factory crap. I want a Alpine or Bose or whatever, and you'd spend a bunch of money to get it in there. Now, one of the things that prompted this whole thing was a book that you just finished. Um, Talking about the people's first cars. And it's a book that I've
Yeah,
always wanted to read and never got around to.
it's a book called My First Car by Matt Stone, and I'll just
And
tell
if
you
you're
about the
familiar with
company.
automotive journalism, you know who Matt Stone is. It's not the same guy who does he's
South Park,
in no way
right? He
related to South Park.
he um he used to be the executive editor of Motor Trend, I believe. Yeah, yeah. And the book just is a compilation of celebrities that are recounting basically their stories about their first cars. And the one concept throughout the book is that everyone loved their first car, no matter if it was a piece of shit and broke
Hmm.
down a lot.
It's true.
Uh, and they all say they wish they'd kept the car.
Yeah, well, in my case, I'm glad I didn't actually keep it after what happened
Yeah,
to it. But
yeah.
um,
That it would have been pretty impractical, but as long as nothing happens to my Accord, I'll probably keep it.
well,
Even if I had to go overseas or something,
let
I'd
me
probably
let me give you
store it.
another example. I have a friend, a neighbor, who his first car was actually a car that wasn't he never owned, right? It was his grandmother's car, and she
Uh,
basically gave it to him, just didn't sign anything over, just said, "Here, take the car and drive it." And it was a 1950s Cadillac, or yeah, 1950s Lincoln. And I it's he's an older guy, Vietnam veteran and stuff, and it's hilarious because just about a year ago he found that car, and he basically went to the lady and he said, "You tell me the number and I write a check. I don't care." Because and the car's in horrible shape. It's been sitting in a barn and it's all
yeah.
rusted and stuff's missing off of it and whatever. He said, "I don't care. I will write you a check for whatever to get this car." And the lady basically was really, was like, wow, really? And he said, yes, because that was my grandmother's car, and it was the first car I ever had. And she said, oh, well, he basically ended up getting it for it was about, I think it was $200 or $300, because she wanted basically to pay to replace the barn door that was falling off the barn it was in. And then
Oh,
he
that's
just
pretty
had to
cool.
bring his trailer out and figure out how to get it out of there and get it on the trailer. And then he brought it home, and it's been sitting in the back of his shop. This is the guy I've talked about before that restores gas pumps and stuff. And it's been sitting in the back of his shop, and he's been slowly but surely finding original replacement parts for it
That's
and
cool.
stacking them up. And he says when he has enough of them, he'll take the car apart and fix it. Um, but he's pulled the body off of it, and all of I mean, he tells stories when he talks about the car, and this is universal. When he talks about the car, he doesn't talk about the car. He talks about the stuff that he did with the car. He
Right.
talks about sneaking beer in the trunk and hiding it behind sleeping bags and stuff, and they pretend to go camping, and all the
Well,
stuff they used to
something
do as
in my
teenagers.
first car is that a lot of these celebrities, they said I sold it and because I needed money for school or I needed money to,
Yeah,
get my career going for business, something. And I recently sold a motorcycle and same reason, and I kind of regret doing it. But the thing that a lot of these people did later is that they bought a similar car um, years later because they couldn't track down their original one, just to remind them of that what their first car was, and it could have been, could have been something like a '49 Chevy that, or something like that. And there's a lot of pretty famous people in here. I'd say there's John Glenn. There's some athletes. That section's not as interesting because it was taken from another book, but there's Eric Bana. He's a Australian actor. Jay Leno, who's a huge car guy. Yeah, he even says he had a '34 pickup. He's tried to track it down. That specific pickup he had,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's just a really cool book. Piero Ferrari, the son of Enzo Ferrari, his first car was a Mini Cooper, '60s Mini Cooper, and
Oh.
I'd say some of the stories are a lot more interesting than others, because I'd assume Matt Stone was able to get access to people for longer, or some people are just honestly smarter.
Yeah, well,
You can sort of tell.
and some people, maybe some people just aren't as good at telling the story.
Yeah,
It's just how it
yeah.
is. And
There's some auto writers in here too, who, in the back of the book, who do a really good job
yeah,
of recounting their stories. So there's
um, we'll
Peter
link to the
Egan
book.
and
We'll link
Ken
to the book
Gross. Yeah.
on Amazon and stuff, so people can go find it. It's a, it's like I said, that's a book I've been wanting to read because that's a pretty cool. It's pretty cool to learn these things. Like just last night, I was having a tough time falling asleep, so I got on YouTube and I started watching videos of old interviews with bands that I really like to listen to. That have music that I've listened to for all my adult life. And um, just watching these interviews of them, taken in the '90s and the early 2000s, where they're talking about when they first started, what they were doing, and where they were, the things that were happening, and stuff like that. And it's just, that sort of thing. If you're this sort of book or anything like that, it's just the sort of thing where you feel a connection with them because you've been there. Um, we've all
Yeah.
owned, our first car was what everybody would assume would call a pile of crap. Nobody's first car was a brand new Alfa Romeo or a Bentley
Yeah.
or anything. Nobody
Well,
interesting,
what's funny is
talked
actually a
about
lot of people in this book uh, owned MGs, and
it.
those are definitely piles of crap.
Yeah. Well, it's funny to me when I go to car shows and I talk to guys, classic car shows, and you talk to guys, and their first car is almost always a version of the car they're displaying. And if that wasn't their first car, it was their first car was a similar car. You know, you'll be talking to the guy and he's got like a Pontiac GTO there and he's talking about it and he's like, yeah, and my first car was a AMC or it was basically another one of those sleeper muscle cars that were popular at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like, wow, seriously? You know, that was your first car? And he's like, yeah, I never should have sold it because you can't find them at all anymore. You know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Or the guy whose first car was a Studebaker. He's like, at the time I thought it was a horrible pile of crap. Now it's one of the most collectible cars ever. You know, and you hear about that all the time. It's amazing. So I think we need to wrap up. I think it's
yeah.
What is it? I don't even know what time it is. About 11.
I would definitely. This is a great I'd say coffee table book. My first car, and it's actually I think a book that even if you have someone who's not a car person, I think you can still have a lot of fun just reading some of these out loud to people. If, like I said, it's at the dinner table or coffee table, just because
on the commode.
yeah. Camping, you know, it's a really fun book, and it actually has me thinking about some similar books I could do, not about cars, but.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is Adam from carnewscafe.com, and I hope you guys enjoyed this My First Car episode.
Yeah, and this is Aaron from carnewscafe.com, and we'll talk to you guys soon.